Did you know that a single step was capable of shaking the entire Roman Republic? When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he not only challenged Pompey and the Senate, but also proved to the world that he was willing to go to the ultimate consequences for power. This marking moment triggered conflicts that would forever change the course of ancient history and gave rise to a new model of government, paving the way for future imperial ambitions. But was it all just about battles and territories? In fact, the confrontation between Caesar and Pompey was also a clash of ideas. On one side, a charismatic leader who dreamed of reforming Rome. On the other, defenders of a traditional and conservative order. Cleopatra enters the scene, adding charm, intrigue, and geopolitical interest, completing the triangle that would redefine not only the fate of Rome, but of the entire Mediterranean region. If you want to understand how the Republic succumbed to these forces and gave way to an empire that shaped Western civilization, stay with us. We will see decisive battles, surprising alliances, and bold decisions that make this chapter of history remembered as one of the most fascinating of all time. The end of the 1st century BC was marked by an internal crisis that shook the foundations of the Roman Republic. Endemic corruption, profound social inequalities, and a growing tension between political factions created an explosive scenario. This turbulent environment was the perfect ground for the emergence of charismatic leaders, each seeking to reform or control Rome in their own way. And the most interesting thing is that this atmosphere of rivalries planted the seed of future conflicts that would extend beyond the city walls. It was in this context that the first triumvirate emerged, an informal alliance between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus to concentrate power. While Crassus held immense wealth, Pompey was an established military hero, and Caesar demonstrated impressive political and diplomatic skills. The death of Crassus in the disastrous campaign against the Parthians left a void in this trio, amplifying the antagonism between Caesar and Pompey. But how did this rupture become so devastating? Just remember that without Crassus, the ambitions of the two remaining leaders collided inevitably. Caesar, already very popular among the troops and the people, wanted to reform Rome and grant rights to more citizens. Pompey, on the other hand, was increasingly aligning himself with the Senate, representing the conservative faction that saw Caesar as a threat to the Republican tradition. This rivalry, besides being political, also carried the dispute for military prestige, as both were renowned generals. And here's the crucial point. They not only differed in state visions but also embodied rival factions ready to confront each other. The spark came in 49 BC when Caesar, by crossing the Rubicon River with his legions, declared war on the Senate and Pompey. This act, considered one of the most iconic moments in Roman history, symbolized Caesar's choice to openly confront the established power. The shout, "Alea iacta est," the die is cast, echoed as a forewarning of an irreversible change in Rome's political landscape. And this bold step would pave the way for the first great battle between these titans, a battle that would redefine the future of the Roman world. The Battle of Pharsalus marked the direct confrontation between the two greatest military forces of the time. Pompey led a numerous army, with a large cavalry contingent and the backing of many senators. Caesar commanded fewer troops, yet comprised of seasoned veterans familiar with their general's bold tactics. Interestingly, even outnumbered, the cohesion and confidence that Caesar inspired were decisive factors in the unfolding of events. Pompey, backed by the Senate's majority, believed he could win quickly due to his numerical superiority. His plans involved the massive use of cavalry to flank Caesar's lines, creating a siege situation. Confident in this strategy, Pompey's army felt an imminent sense of victory, which boosted their soldiers' morale. But would this apparent numerical advantage be enough to break the discipline of Caesar's veterans? Caesar, for his part, hid a reserve of specially trained infantry behind his lines, ready to surprise the enemy cavalry. As Pompey's cavalry advanced, they encountered an unexpected counteroffensive, which quickly caused panic and dispersal. This tactical blow destabilized the entire Pompeian formation, exposing its flaws and generating chaos on the battlefield. And the most fascinating thing is to observe how, in a matter of minutes, a theoretical advantage could transform into an irreparable disadvantage. With the troops in disarray, Pompey's morale plummeted, and he decided to flee, abandoning his army to its fate. Caesar's victory at Pharsalus not only shattered the Republican resistance but also profoundly shook the Senate's confidence. This victory would become a milestone in the final downfall of the Republic, as it consolidated Caesar's image as an unquestionable leader. And after this overwhelming triumph, an inevitable question arose. Where would Pompey turn in search of salvation? Defeated and without many options, Pompey sought refuge in Egypt, hoping for assistance from Ptolemy III, whose father he had supported in the past. Pompey's belief was that the young king would remember this debt and welcome him with safety and respect. However, the political situation in Egypt was complex and marked by internal disputes and ambitious advisors. This only reinforces how Rome was seen as a feared power, capable of directly influencing the life and death of foreign rulers. In Egypt, the decision to welcome Pompey generated fear of retaliation from Caesar, who was rapidly approaching. Ptolemy III, advised by his ministers, opted to eliminate Pompey as soon as he landed on the Egyptian coast. The execution not only removed a possibly troublesome ally but also aimed to please Caesar, the victor. But did they foresee Caesar's reaction upon receiving the head of his former ally and rival? When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was presented with Pompey's head as a gift to seal Ptolemy III's goodwill. However, instead of celebrating, Caesar was deeply saddened, ordering funeral honors for the deceased. This attitude reflected not only personal respect, but also a sense of political greatness in the face of a longtime adversary. And what's even more striking, the gesture exposed how Rome's reputation weighed so heavily that foreign monarchs would take extreme measures. Pompey's death marked the end of an era and left Caesar as the central figure in Roman politics. On the other hand, it revealed the instability in Egypt, where the dispute between Ptolemy III and Cleopatra began to boil. Thus, the assassination of Pompey not only sealed the fate of one of Rome's greatest generals, but also initiated a new chapter for Caesar. And the question that arises is, how would this Egyptian turmoil further influence the fate of Rome? Upon arriving in Egypt, Caesar plunged into a dynastic dispute between the young Ptolemy III and his sister Cleopatra, both claiming the throne. The Ptolemaic kingdom, famous for its wealth and culture, was experiencing intense internal rivalry, and the Roman presence only worsened tensions. Seeking stability for his own interests, Caesar saw in Cleopatra a potential ally to reinforce his control in the region. And so Egypt became yet another stage for Roman ambitions, opening doors for future interventions. By allying with Cleopatra, Caesar sought not only strategic advantage but also became embroiled in a romance that ignited everyone's curiosity. Cleopatra, young and cunning, understood that her connection with Caesar could strengthen her position against her brother. However, the decision to support Cleopatra plunged Caesar into an urban war in Alexandria, where the king's troops fiercely resisted. And surprisingly, amid this dispute, the legendary Library of Alexandria was partially burned, generating irreparable losses. With intense clashes in the narrow streets of Alexandria, Caesar found himself cornered, depending on reinforcements to survive. It was then that Mithridates of Pergamon appeared to support him, bringing additional forces and tipping the scales in favor of the Romans. The final victory secured Cleopatra the throne and strengthened Caesar's power, who began to indirectly control one of the wealthiest kingdoms of the time. For the Egyptians, the outcome demonstrated that Rome wouldn't hesitate to interfere to impose its political preferences. The War of Alexandria left deep marks, both for Egypt and for the Roman Republic. Caesar's success in this campaign consolidated the notion that he was capable of defeating any adversary, inside or outside of Rome. This episode would become a precedent for future Roman interventions in various regions of the Mediterranean, paving the way for a true territorial empire. And still looming was the question, how would the relationship between Caesar and Cleopatra influence the paths of power in Rome? After the battles, Caesar remained in Egypt for some time, enjoying Cleopatra's hospitality. To the eyes of the Roman world, this represented scandalous luxury, as he was estranged from Rome's obligations amid a civil war. Cleopatra, for her part, took the opportunity to strengthen her position and legitimize her reign, now recognized by the most powerful leader in the Mediterranean. And undoubtedly, this alliance went beyond political interests, as the passion between them was evident and discussed everywhere. According to historical accounts, Caesar and Cleopatra traveled together along the Nile, visiting temples and enjoying the splendor of Egypt. It was as if two great powers were uniting: military Rome and Egypt, heir to ancient dynasties and millennia-old traditions. In this climate of mutual fascination, Ptolemy XV was born, known as Caesarion, whom Cleopatra presented as Caesar's son. But did this union foresee the merging of empires and dynasties, creating a new axis of power in the Mediterranean? Many in Rome feared that Caesar wished to crown Cleopatra, or even govern jointly with her, establishing a monarchical regime. However, Caesar was aware that the Senate and the Roman elite would not easily accept a foreign queen. For this reason, he chose to maintain Egypt under Cleopatra's formal control, but in practice, it was tethered to Roman interests. Interestingly, this seemingly fragile arrangement would prove to be durable and profitable for both parties. However, problems still awaited Caesar back in Rome, where he needed to conclude the war against the last Republican strongholds. Thus, he had to leave Cleopatra behind and return, knowing that his influence over her and Egypt was solidified. This political and romantic involvement, however, didn't end with Caesar's departure, as Cleopatra would still play a key role in the history of Mark Antony and Octavian Augustus. Caesar's march toward the last Republican rebels indicated that the Republic was closer to its effective end. As Caesar dealt with his campaigns in Egypt, the remnants of Pompey's supporters regrouped in North Africa and Hispania. Leaders loyal to Pompey, now without their general, sought alliances with other kingdoms like Numidia, ruled by Juba I. This king provided troops and war elephants, boosting the morale of the Republicans who still dreamed of regaining power in Rome. But to what extent would this desperate effort be able to face Caesar's veteran army, victorious on so many fronts? The Battle of Thapsus in 46 BC was the ultimate test for this coalition. Caesar landed in North Africa and faced organized resistance, but it was not strong enough to contain him. Caesar's overwhelming victory dashed the hopes of the Republicans in the region, destroying their capacity for coordination. More significantly, this victory demonstrated Caesar's tactical superiority, reinforcing his prestige throughout the Roman world. Spain still remained, where Pompey's sons were trying to keep the Republican flame alive. Unyielding, Caesar marched there and, after fierce battles, achieved a final victory that ultimately ended opposing forces. Thus, in 45 BC, Caesar found himself as the principal ruler of Rome, with no rivals who could challenge him militarily. We could say that this was the definitive blow to the Republic, leaving the future of an increasingly centralized regime open to question. The consolidation of Caesar's power as lifetime dictator laid the groundwork for the establishment of a personal government. Many see this period as the embryo of what would become the Roman Empire, with Augustus formalizing the title of emperor shortly thereafter. The fall of the last Republican pockets not only reinforced Caesar, but also signaled to all that the old order was irretrievably lost. This authoritarian model would be reenacted later, whenever Roman generals vied for absolute power. Caesar's victory and Augustus's subsequent rise inaugurated a period where internal disputes became a constant in the Roman Empire. Just recall the tumultuous year of the four emperors in AD 69, when rival generals succeeded each other in power within months. Civil wars became almost part of the Roman structure, revealing how the model left by Caesar had its vulnerabilities. Most striking is witnessing how the seeds planted by him germinated into repetitive conflicts in the following centuries. During the crisis of the 3rd century, AD 235-284, numerous emperors were deposed by ambitious military commanders. This instability, in a way, reflected a concentration of power that always attracted new conflicts. Caesar had demonstrated that a determined man could overcome the institutional barriers of Rome, inspiring future leaders. It is no surprise that the Roman Empire was constantly shaken by coups and large-scale internal conflicts. Egypt, definitively conquered after the deaths of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, became one of the pillars of the empire. Its wheat production was vital for supplying the capital, making control over this region a strategic piece. This dependence created a form of governance in which the emperor directly appointed the prefects of Egypt, bypassing the Senate. Thus, the strength of a centralized power became evident, something that Caesar had anticipated by keeping Cleopatra on the throne. The way Caesar handled power disputes served as a model for future emperors, consolidating the concept of a supreme imperium. Augustus, his political heir, refined this idea by creating institutions that masked absolute power behind a republican facade. Though the republic formally existed, the emperor controlled armies, provinces, and, in many cases, even succession itself. Looking at this whole panorama, we realize how Caesar's civil wars were the turning point that buried the republic once and for all. Recapping each stage, it is clear that Caesar's civil war against Pompey was much more than a conflict between generals. It was the beginning of a profound transformation, culminating in the emergence of a model of centralized power. The Battle of Pharsalus, Pompey's tragic death in Egypt, and Caesar's struggle to consolidate his dominance marked the dawn of a new era. Even more revealing is that these battles and alliances paved the way for the construction of the Roman Empire, influencing empires and dynasties worldwide. This historical turning point shows us how the ambition of a few can shape the lives of many, altering the fate of entire nations. Reflecting on Caesar, Pompey, and Cleopatra, we recognize that each choice had repercussions that echoed through the centuries. Rome's interventions in Egypt, the last remnants of republican resistance, and Caesar's military strength formed the pieces of this puzzle. And there is no denying the fascination these figures exert even today, inspiring studies, theories, and passionate debates. Now the question arises for you. Which event, in your opinion, contributed the most to the end of the Republic and the emergence of the empire? Was it Caesar's boldness in crossing the Rubicon, the Battle of Pharsalus, or the alliance with Cleopatra in Egypt? Share your view in the comments, as this topic remains alive and can be interpreted in various ways. Also, be sure to explore other videos on the channel to better understand how these transformations impacted different periods of Roman history. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe to receive more content about battles, conquests, and the evolution of great civilizations. This is just the beginning of a journey that leads us to analyze empires and dynasties that change the course of humanity. Your participation is essential for keeping the channel active, so share the video and let's together unveil the most fascinating chapters of history. Thank you for following us this far, and see you next time.